Hey guys, tonight we slip into silk sandals and step through the marbled halls of ancient Greece, not as a warrior, not a philosopher, but as something far less discussed, a male concubine. That's right. You're about to become property, with polish painted, perfumed, and paraded like fine imported wine. You sit in a sun-drenched courtyard, your cheeks dusted with white lead, to make you glow lips tinted with crushed berries and eyebrows carefully darkened with charcoal ash. Your hair curled and scented with imported oil from Phoenicia. You're not just being dressed, you're being transformed into an aesthetic ideal, the soft, almost feminine beauty prized by elite Greek men. You look less like a soldier and more like a living sculpture. And you're not here to fight. You're here to please. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts like so many ancient Greek lives, not with your name, but with your value. Maybe you were taken as a prisoner of war, captured young, too pretty to kill. Or perhaps you were sold by desperate parents during a famine. Doesn't matter now. You're in a high-walled estate near Athens, learning quickly that survival here depends less on muscle and more on how well you can flutter your eyelashes without blinking in fear. You're not just one of many slaves. You're being groomed, literally. An older eunuch, half-servant, half-coach, teaches you to walk gracefully, speak just enough to intrigue, and laugh softly, never too loudly. He even teaches you to hold a cup of wine in a way that makes your wrists look delicate. It's a whole language of seduction, and you're learning fast. Historians still argue whether such grooming was ritualized or improvised per household, but either way, the transformation was unmistakable. You are not the boy you were. You're an object of beauty now, but not just beauty, utility. You become part of your master's reputation. Your appearance is a reflection of his wealth and his refined tastes. And don't get it twisted, there's no freedom in being adored. You can't refuse a touch, a glance, or an invitation. Even admiration feels heavy when you can't control what it earns you. One day, a visiting merchant compliments your pale skin. That evening, you're rubbed with powdered chalk before your owner's friends arrive. Another time, someone comments on your singing voice. Suddenly, you're expected to hum love ballads during long, wine-heavy dinners. You're not asked. You're expected. You're a fixture like the silver goblets, only more fragile. Your quarters are quiet, adorned with soft linen and delicate incense. But don't let the luxury fool you. That softness is for display. You're allowed smooth skin and gentle hands, because someone else is doing the hard labor, and you're doing something else entirely, the emotional labor of being wanted, but never respected. And the irony, some of those who admire you in private would publicly scorn the idea of loving a man. See, in ancient Athens, it was fine expected even for men to have relationships with boys or youths, especially if the younger one remained passive. But once you were seen as too old for that role, suddenly you're inconvenient. In fact, one fringe theory suggests that painted male concubines inspired certain comic characters in Greek plays, the overly pampered, overly emotional, fainting types. A joke in the agora, but a reality behind closed villa doors. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a polished bronze mirror. You look like a statue of a minor god, maybe Ganymede, the beautiful cupbearer Zeus stole for Olympus. You're flattered a little. Then the door opens, and you're reminded even Ganymede was stolen. So here you are, painted and powdered, perfumed and practiced. The soft rustle of your robe announces your arrival long before your voice does. And you've learned to walk in sandals without a sound, to smile without showing teeth, and to weep without letting a single tear fall. Because in this world, beauty isn't power, it's bait. And you're the one on the hook. The sky is a dusty peach when they lead you to the auction block. You've been scrubbed, oiled, and brushed so many times your skin feels more like wax than flesh. Somewhere in the crowd, a man is bargaining over amphora of wine. Another is inspecting a donkey's teeth. And then there's you lined up with the other delicacies as the auctioneer calls you. He means it as a compliment. Probably. You're displayed like fine goods turned to the left now, to the right hands behind your back. The man beside you, a Gaul with a scarred lip, glares at everyone. You don't. You've already learned that smiling even slightly earns better prices. Not for you, of course. For the one selling you. Historians still argue whether auctions for male concubines were formally separate from general slave markets or just discreetly handled within them. What's clear is that the rules shifted when beauty entered the picture. You weren't being sold for labor. You were being sold for ambiance. A portly Athenian in a cobalt himation fingers his beard and gestures toward you. The auctioneer begins his pitch. Trained in reading and lyre. Polite. Speaks Ionian dialect. No blemishes. He doesn't mention your ability to memorize poetry after hearing it once, or how you can mix perfume better than the estate's steward. But those aren't sale points they're surprises for later. Sold. For 2 talents and a goat thrown in for some reason. Maybe it's a joke. Maybe it's symbolic. You don't ask. You don't speak unless spoken to. Now you ride in the back of a cart, covered in a linen shroud, to keep the sun off your newly oiled skin. You don't know this man. You don't know the house you're being taken to. And yet, in a twisted way, you're lucky. You're beautiful. You fetched a good price. That means you'll likely be spared the harshest tasks. It also means you'll be seen more, touched more, talked about more. The villa sits nestled in a hillside surrounded by olive groves and whispers. As you're led inside, household slaves glance at you, eyes darting expressions unreadable. Your competition, maybe, or pity. Or both. Your new master doesn't waste time. He circles you like a buyer inspecting a vase. He nods approvingly at your shoulders, your waist, the smooth plane of your chest. Then he claps his hands and sends for a servant to show you to your corner. Not a room, a corner, your belongings. A comb, a short tunic, and a vial of rose oil are already waiting. The tunic is dyed purple, rare and expensive. That tells you everything. He didn't buy a body. He bought a showpiece. Dinner that night is not for you, but you're summoned anyway. You're told to stand by the master's chair, refill his cup with watered wine, and if he asks, sing a few lines from Sappho. You've only ever heard her poems recited by gruff voices in smoky rooms. Now you're expected to make them float like petals on air. You do. And the guests nod and smirk, and one even winks. You're not sure whether to be flattered or frightened. Later, as the laughter fades and the last guest stumbles home, the master motions for you to sit beside him. You obey, careful to keep your posture relaxed but alert. A warm breeze flows through the open atrium. Cicadas sing. You feel the weight of his gaze like warm honey, sticky and slow. You'll do, he says. You nod, but inside you flinch, because approval means permanence. You're not a servant who might fade into the background. You are now part of this man's social display. Like his lacquered furniture or his imported glassware, you are an extension of his wealth and taste. Still, there's a weird kind of pride that bubbles up inside you. Not joy exactly, but validation. You survived the block. You made a good impression. You did what was required. A quirky tidbit some scholars love to mention: in certain upper-class homes, slaves like you were dressed to match the house's color palette. You were literally coordinated to the decor. A crimson sash here, a sea green wrap there. Even your jewelry, yes, you'll eventually wear it, may be selected to harmonize with the frescoes. You think about this as you lie awake that night, staring at the moon through a small window high on the wall. You don't cry. Not because you're brave, but because crying is noisy and noise is dangerous. And so on your first night as a concubine in ancient Greece, you close your eyes and try to remember the smell of your mother's hair, the sound of the river near your childhood home, and the feeling of not being watched all the time. But mostly you just listen to footsteps, to whispers, to your own breathing, and try to forget that tomorrow your new life truly begins. Morning arrives not with a rooster's crow, but with the rustle of silk. A servant wakes you by tapping gently on your shoulder, careful not to smudge the kohl around your eyes. You slept in it. Apparently, that was expected. The face must always be ready, she says. You sit up slowly. Your limbs are stiff, but not from labor, from stillness. It's surprising how heavy inaction can feel when it isn't voluntary. You're led into the private quarters of the estate. No loud commands, no barking overseers, just silence. This is not a house of chaos, it's a house of etiquette. You will not be whipped for clumsiness here. But make no mistake, a fumbled sentence or a crooked smile can cost you just as much. You enter a room where walls are painted in soft ochres and vines curl across the ceiling in fresco. A large couch sits beneath gauzy curtains, the kind used to soften sunlight and expectations. It's not a bedroom, but it might as well be. This is the master's retreat. You are part of its furniture now. The house's steward, a meticulous man with a nose like a knife, gives you your new routine. Bathe every morning. Be presentable by the 3rd hour. Attend your master if he calls. Don't eat garlic. Don't speak unless invited. And most of all, always appear tranquil. You are a breeze, he says, not a thunderstorm. You're not alone in this strange gilded purgatory. The house holds 2 other favorites. One is a younger boy from Lydia who barely speaks Attic Greek. The other is an older man, mid-20s, whose eyes always dart like a cat's. He knows things. You can tell. He speaks to you on the 3rd day. Don't look them in the eye unless they're laughing, he mutters while helping you adjust your sash. And if they laugh too long, leave the room. His name is Peros. He was born free, sold after a scandal. He doesn't say more. But he watches you with a sort of amused pity, like he's seen the same play too many times. Your master visits that night. Not to command, just to observe. He sits with a cup of wine while you recite a short poem by Anacreon. You don't know all the words, but you know how to move your hands, how to tilt your chin, how to make the air around you shimmer with softness. He applauds gently, then dismisses you. It feels like relief. It also feels like you failed. You don't know which emotion to trust. Historians still debate how deeply emotional bonds could run between masters and their favored concubines. Some insist it was purely transactional pleasure wrapped in ownership. Others argue there were cases of real affection, even influence. There's no shortage of pottery showing 2 men reclining together exchanging not just touch, but eye contact. But images are interpretations. You know better now the line between tenderness and display is blurrier than it looks. The next morning you begin lessons. Not in reading, not yet. You're taught to pour wine without splashing, to arrange a fruit tray like it's a sculpture, and to serve with your head inclined just enough to show reverence, but not so much that you vanish. And then there's music. Oh, the music. Your fingers blister learning the lyre, but it's worth it. Music softens the room. It hides the silence. It gives you something to do with trembling hands. There's a detail from the fringes of Greek history. Some believe high-born families would hire poets to train their concubines in romantic speech. Not for poetry's sake, but to make their pets more charming to guests. You're not surprised. You're being refined, not educated. There's a difference. By your 10th night, you're performing at small dinners, never as the focus, always as a side note, something pleasant to look at between courses. You sing, you pour, you smile. You are invisible, yet constantly seen. You begin to sense the house as a body. The women's quarters are its breath, soft, essential, but often ignored. The kitchen is its stomach, busy and unglamorous. And you're the perfume. Beautiful, fleeting, easy to discard. Still, you begin to claim small victories. One night, a guest trips over a stool you place too close to the table. He laughs. Even your concubine has a sense of humor, he says to your master. Your master smiles. You've earned something tonight. Not power exactly, but a slightly longer leash. Later in your quiet corner, you whisper a joke back to yourself and allow one single laugh. Just one. Because you know better now, even in silence, even in service, even in a house of silk and shadows. Your story is still being written, and sometimes it writes back. The room smells like rose oil and warm pine. You're sitting cross-legged on a low stool, while a servant gently massages your shoulders, preparing you for the evening. Not a banquet tonight, a private visit. Just you and the master. He hasn't said why. You don't ask. Your robe is thinner than usual. Decorative, not protective. And your body, polished and powdered, has become something other than yours. You glance at the lyre nearby, then look away. You won't be singing tonight. Welcome to the more delicate half of your training. Pyrrhos warned you this part would come. Seduction isn't just about looks, he whispered, once peeling figs for a platter. It's about knowing when to breathe and when not to. You enter the room on silent feet. The lamp is low, casting shadows that ripple across the walls like seaweed. Your master reclines on a couch, cradling a goblet. He nods toward the open space beside him. You sit, and then you wait. Not for commands. Not for music. For moments. He speaks idly about the day's politics, something about a land dispute with Sparta. You nod, ask a soft question, keep your eyes lowered just enough. You're not expected to offer opinions, only ambiance. You're a cushion with a pulse, but this is where the real artistry begins. You know exactly how to shift your weight, so the fabric slides softly across your skin. How to laugh lightly at his jokes, even the bad ones. How to pour more wine with a wrist just a little too graceful to be accidental. You're not just a companion, you're a performance. Historians still argue whether concubines were ever truly trained in seduction, or whether they simply adapted reading cues the way actors read a stage. But you know the truth, adaptation is its own training. You've learned more from a raised eyebrow than you ever did from spoken instructions. One evening you're asked to dance, not publicly, not theatrically, just in that private room with the flickering oil lamp and the faint sound of sandals in the hall. You begin slowly, not quite sure of the movements, until Perros, who has been watching quietly from the corner, nods and taps a quiet rhythm with 2 fingers. You follow it. Let your arms rise like branches, your steps slide like water. You are no longer a body. You are a ripple. And when it's done, the master claps once. That's all. One clap. You bow and return to your place. It's unclear whether he's amused, aroused, or bored. That's the hardest part. You're not performing for applause, you're performing for stability. A mistake means being replaced. A slip in charm means disappearing into some lesser role, or being sold. A quirky tidbit from ancient Greek life, it was considered bad luck for a host to spill wine during a symposium, but perfectly acceptable for a concubine to pour too much if it pleased the guests. Overindulgence was charm. Precision, that was for accountants. So you become good at too much wine, too much softness, too much attentiveness. You memorize every guest's favorite fruit, how many olives they like on a plate, what kind of poetry makes them nostalgic. You're a mirror to their desires, a sponge for their sorrows, and a vessel for their jokes. And eventually they begin to talk around you, as if you're not there, as if you're a marble column or a decorative fan. That's when the real education begins. You learn who's sleeping with whom, who's conspiring, who hates the democracy they pretend to defend. You nod quietly, refill goblets, and lock it all away. Because information is the only thing in this house that no one expects you to have, and the only thing no one can take away once you do. There's a debate among scholars were concubines ever used as spies. The sources are thin, but you can see how it might happen. You're there. You're always there. And everyone forgets you're listening. One night after a particularly tense dinner, your master retires early, and you're left alone in the atrium. Piros joins you, chewing a fig and watching the moon. He likes you, he says without emotion. You nod. Good. That means we survive the winter. You don't ask what he means. You're starting to understand that in this world, affection is currency, but not protection. A shift in taste, a rumor, a single poor performance, and everything could change. Still you dance. You pour. You charm. Because here, elegance isn't vanity, it's survival dressed in silk. And tomorrow the training continues. You hear it before you see it, laughter thick with wine and bravado echoing from the main hall. Tonight is a symposium, not just a dinner, but a theater of power, wit, and indulgence. And you once again are part of the stage dressing. The symposium is sacred in a very Greek way, chaotic male and deeply ritualized. Reclining couches form a semicircle. Bronze craters brim with diluted wine. Philosophers and generals lounge with laurel wreaths tilted drunkenly across their foreheads. Flutes play. Poets brag. Everyone's pretending not to be watching you. You glide between them with practiced grace, your robe brushing just above the floor, your eyes lowered but alert. You pour wine, refill olives, smile just enough. Your every movement is calculated to appear effortless, an illusion that took months to master. Your master, seated in the central place of honor, calls you over. Play something cheerful, he says, waving toward the lyre. You do. And as your fingers skim the strings, the room stills just a little. Some men listen. Some pretend not to. One too drunk to care blurts, by the gods he moves like a breeze through fig trees. The others laugh. You smile like it doesn't matter. But it does. The symposium is not just entertainment. It's a showcase. You're not here for your master's pleasure alone. You're here to impress his guests. Maybe even tempt them. And you understand now, your body is your master's reputation with legs. Historians still argue how sexual these events became. Were concubines simply musicians and servers? Or did the night often end with them accompanying a guest to a private room? The sources, Plato's dialogues, scattered pottery scenes, leave space for speculation. But you know the answer already. Some nights are tame, others are transactional. One guest, an aging aristocrat with heavy rings and a heavier stare, beckons you closer. Your perfume, he says, sniffing, isn't local. You murmur, "From Cyprus, sir." He smiles. Just like your manners. That earns a laugh from a few couches away. You don't laugh. Compliments in this room are knives disguised as flowers. A young guest asks you to sing. Another offers to share you with your master. More laughter. Someone throws a fig at his head. He ducks. The fig splatters. You keep playing. This is the rhythm of the symposium. Too much wine, too many eyes, and no clear line between praise and possession. You retreat when the steward motions. There's a rhythm to that too. You stay long enough to be remembered, leave before you become a toy. In the cool hallway outside, Pyrrhos leans against a column, arms crossed. You held the room, he says. Didn't drop the rhythm once. You nod. Be careful, he adds. They like new toys for a while, but if one breaks, he trails off. You don't ask him to finish the sentence. There's a quirky theory among fringe historians that concubines were often the originators of trends, whether in fashion, scent, or musical phrasing, because they were always near the elite and always desperate to stand out. You believe it. Just last week, you twisted your sash differently, and now 2 house slaves are mimicking it. You're a slave, but somehow also a tastemaker. It's bizarre and kind of hilarious. But even tastemakers fall out of style. Later, you're summoned again, not to perform, to listen. 2 of your master's guests are arguing, loudly. One insists the war in Sicily is a foolish drain on the treasury. The other claims it's a test of Athens' manhood. You refill their cups. The arguing continues. Eventually, someone turns to you. What do you think, he asks? Is it wise to challenge Syracuse? The room freezes. Everyone watches. You pause just long enough to seem thoughtful, then answer in your softest voice. I wouldn't presume to judge the minds of warriors. A beat. Then your master chuckles. Well said, he murmurs. A golden tongue with a golden leash. The guests laugh again. You smile, swallow your breath, and pour another round. You're not invisible. You're worse, you're decorative. And decorations, no matter how loved, can be replaced. The banquet's over. The songs have faded. Wine-stained lips mumble dreams, and heavy limbs are dragged to couches for sleep. But you remain awake because tonight you heard something you weren't supposed to. It was in the lull between laughter and music. A whispered conversation behind a curtain near the andron, where the men reclined to debate and drink. You were crouched beside the crater, refilling it with watered wine. They assumed you couldn't hear or wouldn't understand. That's always their mistake. He's planning to vote against the tribute. Says Sparta's watching. You didn't even glance up. Just kept pouring like you hadn't just overheard a detail that could upend a dozen alliances. A single whisper spoken too close to a slave's ear, and you now carry a secret like smuggled fire. Back in your corner that night, you lie still. Not from fear, but calculation. Who do you tell, or do you tell no one? Because here's the truth, no one admits knowledge is the only real coin a concubine holds. You begin listening more carefully. Not just to what is said, but what isn't. Who arrives with nervous fingers? Who drinks too quickly? Who flinches at certain names? You smile, you serve, and you catalog. Historians still argue whether concubines, male or female, played real roles in political intrigue. Some believe the notion is romanticized, a product of dramatic plays rather than daily life. Others point to records of courtesans swaying votes with pillow talk. But you know firsthand, people talk when they're relaxed. And no one relaxes more than a drunk man wrapped in linen full of figs, flanked by flattery. One night the master brings you into his private study. Not for touch, not for performance. Just to sit, pour him wine, and listen as he talks himself into and out of strategies. He never asks your opinion. But you offer one anyway, soft, indirect, phrased like an observation. Your guest from last night seemed uneasy when Sicily came up. The master raises an eyebrow. Did he? You nod gently. He spilled his wine. It's subtle, but it lands. You see the flicker in your master's eyes, maybe this one's useful. And just like that, you're not just a concubine. You're an accessory with ears. There's a fringe tidbit you once heard from another slave. In some households, concubines were said to be more reliable than scribes because parchment can be stolen. But a silent boy who knows when to disappear, that's harder to read, harder to find, and harder to lose. You start reading stolen scraps of parchment in the steward's study. Peiros helps. You learn faster than I expected, he says, handing you a wax tablet and stylus late one night. But don't get clever. You're still the vase. You nod, but deep inside a crack of rebellion forms. Not anger, not ambition, just the awareness that you know things others don't. At the next symposium, you watch a visiting general boast about a skirmish near Corinth. But you notice he never names the enemy. His hands tremble when he drinks. He deflects when pressed. Something's off. You mention it to your master, casually. He doesn't react, but later you see him whispering with a senator. You were right. Still, there's danger in this game. Too many observations, too much awareness, and you shift from charming to threatening. That's the line you walk now. A mirror must reflect, never distort. One day you hear servants whispering your name. Not with scorn this time, but with awe. He knew, one says. The boy knew before the steward. You're becoming something else. Not free, not powerful, but relevant. And in a world where bodies are owned, relevance is a kind of resistance. Later, Peiros pulls you aside. Don't think knowledge makes you untouchable. It just means your leash is tied to a longer pole. You nod. But in your heart, a quiet pride grows. You're not just surviving, you're adapting. You're listening. And slowly, like a vine growing between marble cracks, you're making space. Because here in this house of silk and secrets, knowing is the only kind of freedom you'll ever taste. There's a new kind of tension in the villa. You feel it in the air, tight, brittle, like stretched linen on a cold morning. Not from your master, not even from the steward. No, this time it comes from the women. You've always known they watched you, but lately they're watching harder. You feel their eyes even when they're not in the room. Your master's wife, Lady Thalea, is not unkind. She's simply precise. Tall, composed, with a voice like cooled bronze. You've only heard her laugh once, and even then it sounded rehearsed. You rarely see her during the day. Her quarters are sacred, secluded. But every now and then she drifts through the hall where you're playing music or passing wine or simply existing too gracefully, and you know she doesn't like you. She doesn't have to say it. It's in the way her sandals tap faster when you enter a room, the way her hand tightens on the hem of her cloak, the way she once touched your robe and said, "This dye was meant for the priestesses of Artemis." The implication, you don't deserve it. Historians still argue about the dynamic between elite Greek women and their husbands' concubines. Some sources suggest these women turned a blind eye. Others hint at jealousies that flared into cruel whispers, strategic banishments, or worse. In your case, it's colder than hatred. It's competition without acknowledgement. You represent everything she's denied: movement, expression, attention. She's bound by formality and modesty. You, ironically, are freer in your chains than she is in her silk, and that infuriates her. But she isn't your only rival. There are others, house slaves, who've worked here for years now, displaced by your presence. Cooks who curse your beauty in hushed tones. One of the younger attendants even tried to sabotage your sandals, tied them too tight before a dinner, so you'd limp slightly. You smiled through it. Of course you did. Then there's the master's nephew, Arion, 20 vain and sour-eyed. He calls you the swan in front of guests, always with a smirk. One night he accidentally spills wine on your tunic and laughs about how clumsy birds are when they try to serve. You're not stupid. You know what this is. They smell your rise. You've gone from decoration to ornament of influence, from silence to whisper. And nothing makes people more nervous than someone who was never supposed to matter starting to matter. A quirky tidbit: in some regions, it was customary for concubines to avoid eye contact with the matron of the house entirely. Not out of deference, but to avoid provoking her. Imagine that. Being so disliked by design, you have to make yourself invisible to avoid punishment. Peiros warns you, she won't strike, she'll erode you, one task at a time, one whisper at a time. And he's right. Suddenly you're being left out of performances. Your robe isn't cleaned on time. The steward forgets to call you to the evening gathering. The fruit bowl you always prepare replaced by someone else's. Slowly you feel the grip loosening. Not a dismissal, just a quiet unraveling. But you've learned the rhythm of the house. The master notices absence just as much as presence, so you make a calculated move. At the next dinner, when everyone else has gone quiet, you approach the master not with a song, but with a riddle. A clever one, wrapped in metaphor, tied with a bit of gossip from the last symposium. He laughs, really laughs, claps your back, calls you a treasure. Lady Thalea's jaw tightens. Later, she sends for you. You enter her private chamber, heart steady, face blank. She doesn't yell, she doesn't scold. She just stares and says, "You think you're clever." You bow. She adds, "Clever concubines often fall harder than silent ones." You don't reply. There is no safe reply. After that, the air grows even thinner. You perform less, but you watch more. You listen harder. You've slipped below the surface of the household now. No longer a showpiece. You're a whisper behind curtains, a flicker in the atrium shadows, a name passed quietly between servants. Because power here doesn't always come from being adored. Sometimes it comes from not being forgotten. You begin your day not with a greeting, but with a slap. Not from your master, he rarely touches you now, unless there's an audience. But from a servant startled when you crossed into the bathhouse without permission. Your cheek stings. Your pride flares hotter, but you say nothing. Because here, nothing is more dangerous than escalation. You sink into the caldarium steam thick around you like fog, and let the heat melt your expression. You know how to hide bruises now. The rose oil helps, so does the thin veil of powder. And besides, what's a bruise on a concubine? A temporary flaw on a borrowed vase. It's not the first. It won't be the last. Your body is pampered lotions, oils, soothing herbs. You smell like imported myrrh and cedarwood. Your skin glows. You are smooth in places most men wouldn't dare touch with a razor. You're trained to recline gracefully, to gesture with soft wrists, to float through rooms like music. But your knees ache from kneeling too long during rehearsals. Your back stiffens from being bent just enough, always enough to seem deferent. You are silk stretched over exhaustion. Historians still argue whether male concubines received more lavish grooming than their female counterparts. Some claim it was a kind of hyper-decoration overcompensation for their social ambiguity. Others say the grooming was practical appearance as armor in a world that granted you no other protection. You don't need to debate it. You live it. In the evening, you're called to entertain a minor magistrate. He's polite at first. Too polite. His compliments are measured, his fingers twitching with restraint. But by the third cup of wine, the tone shifts. He asks you to dance. You obey. Then he asks again and again. You know this rhythm. You know where it leads. Later, back in your corner, you scrub your arms with salt until your skin burns. It won't remove the memory of hands that lingered too long. But it gives you something to control. Pain, at least, is clear. Unlike approval, which always hides a demand. Peros finds you there, red-armed, still and silent. He sits beside you and says nothing for a while. Just watches your breathing. Then they'll call you lucky, you know. You nod. Soft skin. Full meals, pretty robes. No chains. You nod again. Just remember, luxury is only comfort when you choose it. Otherwise, it's gilded gravity. You smile even if it's faint. He always speaks like a philosopher who forgot to leave the theater. A fringe tidbit you once overheard in some wealthy households: concubines weren't allowed to look at themselves in mirrors unless granted permission. Not because they might grow vain, but because seeing yourself whole might make you remember who you were. One night your master summons you not for music or wine or words, but simply to sit. He's drunk, more than usual. He stares at you like you're an old coin he found in a drawer. Familiar, dull, tarnished. You were prettier when you were quieter, he mutters. You say nothing. He waves a hand. Go. And you do. But not before noticing he didn't say you're not pretty now. Just less so. That distinction matters. It's the difference between being replaced and being shelved. You return to your corner, lie down, and stare at the ceiling. The oil lamp flickers. A breeze snakes through the shutter slats. You wonder how many others were quieter, and how many are buried under that praise. The bruises fade. The aches stay. But you learn. You adapt. You walk with even softer steps. Speak with sweeter tones. Smile with more precision. Every gesture perfected. Not for their comfort, for your survival, because in this house of warm baths and cool cruelty, pain wears perfume, and silence is always expected to smile. You light the incense, like always, one cone of frankincense for Apollo, one stick of myrrh for Aphrodite. Smoke curls upward in delicate spirals, as if even it is too proud to touch the floor. You do it from memory now, not faith. The motions are smoother than the belief behind them. Still you bow, just in case. That's how belief works in this house, precautionary, theatrical, and always observed by someone. You've learned to hold reverence in your hands like an offering dish. Your master expects it. His household includes a small shrine room lavish with silvered mirrors, ivory statues, and softly humming wind chimes at the door. It's less a space for devotion than for performance. You kneel there often, even when your knees ache, even when no gods seem to listen. But it's not about gods, really. It's about roles. Piety is part of your script. You were told once, as your palms were dusted with saffron, that the gods favor the beautiful, that your body so tenderly maintained was a sign of divine approval. But if that were true, you wonder, why do you pray mostly for mercy? A mainstream historical fact in ancient Greece religious life permeated every class and corner of society. Even enslaved people, concubines included, participated in festivals, processions, and temple rites, though usually in the background. Some were even dedicated to temples themselves as sacred attendants, particularly those considered pleasing to the gods. Being touched by the divine could mean anything from serving as a ritual object to being used as one. One priest once stared at you too long during a ceremony. His eyes lingered like wet clay, slow and shaping. He offered your master a charm meant to protect the youth's purity. You still wear it braided into your belt. Not because it protects you, but because it reminds you that even piety has a price. You've met philosophers too. At your master's symposiums, they argue endlessly about whether pleasure is weakness or wisdom, whether love between men elevates or corrupts. They rarely ask what you think. Sometimes you imagine interrupting. Can't it be both? But you never do. In the baths, you overhear a new rumor. A guest whispers that the gods have favorites, and those favorites never grow old. You know what that means. You've seen how fading beauty is treated here, not with cruelty necessarily, but with a kind of polite neglect, like wilting flowers left in a silver vase, still arranged, but never watered. Still, there are quiet moments that feel almost sacred, when you dance under lamplight, and your shadows ripple against marble walls. When a breeze carries temple bells from across the city, and you pause just for a moment to imagine freedom. When Peiros hums a lullaby from a region you've never seen, and you pretend the song is meant for you. A fringe tidbit in some Orphic traditions, the soul was believed to be temporarily trapped in the body, a punishment or test, depending on who you asked. You've often wondered if the soul ever gets used to the cage, or does it just stop rattling? Tonight your master leaves unexpectedly for Delphi. No instructions, no summons, just silence. You slip into the shrine and light the incense alone for no one but yourself. This time you pray to Hermes, not for escape, for clarity. You want to see the world as it is, not as it pretends to be. You want to know which smiles are traps, which hands are kind, which eyes are watching. You ask for truth, even if it burns. You sleep better that night, not because of the gods, because for once no one touches you. No one summons you. The house is quiet, and your body is left to rest as if it were yours. Historians still argue whether concubines like you truly believed in the gods or simply mimicked the rituals they were taught. Some scrolls describe ecstatic devotion, others dry routine, but you think it's more complicated. You've stopped asking if the gods are real. Now you ask if they're kind. The incense burns low. Your dreams are full of wind chimes, unlit altars, and footsteps you can't quite follow. And in the morning you do what you always do. You smile. You bow. You survive. The scroll is not for your eyes, but you read it anyway. It isn't rebellion. Not really. It's survival, one soft step further into the world you're never meant to touch. You find it in your master's study, half open, resting atop a stack of wine-stained receipts and foreign correspondence. The wax seal is already cracked, the ribbon askew. You tell yourself you're only tidying up. That's the lie you wear like perfume. The truth, you're hungry. Not for figs or goat cheese or oil massages. You're hungry for knowledge. In ancient Greece, literacy was not universal even among free citizens. Reading and writing were privileges of the elite, closely guarded. For slaves and concubines, these skills were both rare and dangerous. A learned servant was a servant who might observe record, or worst of all, remember. Your master doesn't know you can read. You don't even know how it happened, not precisely. A glance over a merchant's shoulder. A whispered syllable from a bored tutor. Peros once mouthed letters with you during bath duty, drawing them in the condensation on clay walls. Somewhere in between, carrying amphorae and trimming your hair, it clicked, and now you can't unsee it. The scroll is a letter from a politician, a bribe disguised as poetry. It speaks of shipments, alliances, and a dinner whose guest list should remain fluid. You don't understand all of it, but enough. Enough to know that the man who owns your body also owns influence that can twist laws like ivy. You put it back carefully, exactly as you found it. But your mind races, because now you know something you're not supposed to. A mainstream fact, many ancient households relied on educated slaves to manage accounts, transcribe letters, or act as tutors for children. While male concubines weren't typically given formal education, proximity to literacy often led to a piecemeal understanding, especially for those sharp enough to seize it quietly. In your spare moments, precious and rare, you find more to read. Epigrams carved into courtyard walls, riddles scratched onto broken pottery. Even the slurred graffiti of drunk symposium guests becomes part of your informal curriculum. Every letter is a door. One day, in the quiet haze of mid-afternoon, you discover a short poem tucked between pages of an old ledger. The rose is soft, the thorn is hidden, the hand that plucks may still be bitten. It's unsigned. Maybe your master wrote it. Maybe someone he discarded. Either way, you fold it into memory, where no one can steal it from you. A fringe tidbit, some concubines in ancient Greece were known to compose verses, jokes, or riddles for entertainment. Though their authorship was rarely recorded, fragments survive, playful, biting, often anonymous. Like shadows laughing at the candlelight. You begin to test your limits. You correct a servant's pronunciation under your breath. You whisper a joke you read off a broken vase. You even begin crafting phrases of your own quiet little weapons dressed as compliments, and it pays off. Your master starts inviting you to linger at conversations. Not speak never that, but listen. There's power in being silent and clever. He doesn't know what you know, and that makes you dangerous in a way he can't quite define. But there's danger in your hunger, too. One evening, Peros catches you with a scrap of parchment you weren't meant to have. He doesn't report you. He just stares at you for a long moment and says, "You learn too much, you'll forget who you're pretending to be." You laugh. But that night you sleep with the parchment under your pillow. Historians still argue whether literacy among concubines was a form of resistance or a survival tool. Was learning to read an act of self-liberation, or just another mask to wear? Either way, the truth rarely survives in ink. The letters last longer than the lives behind them. In the dark, you imagine yourself as a character in one of those scrolls, a side note in a margin. A metaphor about beauty and danger. You wonder if anyone centuries from now will try to guess what you thought when you read that poem. Whether they'll even remember you had thoughts. You imagine them whispering, "He must have been clever to hide so well. You're being wrapped in silk again, but this time it's not for a dinner at home. or a bath-time flirtation with your master's friends. Know today you're a gift, a favor, a token of esteem delicately disguised as a person. You're going on a trip. It begins with barely a word of explanation, just a gesture from the steward and a slave collar polished to an unsettling shine. Your master's tone is offhand, like he's loaning a chariot or a prized vase. Be charming. Make me look good. Don't get clever. The carriage smells of cedar and crushed herbs. You sit quietly, your fingers folded over your knees, trying not to sweat into the robes you were forced into. Outside the window, the olive groves blur past like smudged ink. You're headed to another noble's estate. Not for punishment. Not exactly for pleasure. You're part of a diplomatic dance now sent to entertain, observe, and remind your master's friend that he has exquisite taste, not just in horses and property, but in people. This was a real custom. Elite men in ancient Greece often exchanged lavish gifts when brokering business or political favors. Gold vessels, rare wine-trained animals, and yes, occasionally beautiful human beings. Male concubines could be sent as tokens of hospitality or borrowed for symposiums under the guise of entertainment. When you arrive, the estate is grand, larger than your own master's, with vines creeping up marble columns and a fountain that doesn't smell like fish. The master of this house, a lean older man with quick eyes, sizes you up like he's deciding whether you're art or fruit. You bow low. He chuckles. Delightful, he says, as though you're not standing right there. The servants are different here. Less curious, more careful. You're shown to a side room near the baths. A woman, matronly and tired-looking, dusts your shoulders with perfumed powder before dressing you again in thinner silk. They like their offerings fresh, she says not unkindly. At the evening banquet, you're made to sit close to the host. You pour wine. You play the guitarra badly on purpose. You make them laugh. They like that. Laughter's safer than desire. But desire comes anyway. You see it in the flicker of a hand brushing yours too long, in the way the host's voice dips when he asks where you're from, how you came to belong to such an important man. You lie with practiced ease. Your master once told you always seem just smart enough to flatter, never smart enough to threaten. You're good at being borrowed. You sparkle just enough to leave an impression. But the moment you're alone, the loneliness crashes in cold and clinical. You sleep in a strange bed on linen that smells of someone else's sweat and rose oil. The room's too quiet without the whispering wind chimes of your master's villa. The host never touches you physically, at least. He doesn't need to. You're already touched by the idea that you were loaned out like an amphora of rare olive oil. You wonder if you'll ever be sent back chipped. A quirky tidbit. Ancient Greek symposiums often included entertainers known as heteroi companions, who were expected to be intelligent, witty, and sensual. While the term more commonly referred to elite courtesans, male concubines, and beautiful slaves, were also offered during such events, especially to impress or manipulate high-ranking guests. The next morning you catch sight of yourself in the polished bronze of a shaving mirror. You look exquisite, controlled, almost untouchable. But you feel like a sealed letter, beautiful, yes, but hollowed out for someone else's message. You return home days later. Your master doesn't ask what happened. He doesn't need to. The very fact that you came back calm, intact, and a little quieter speaks volumes. He nods, then moves on to fuss about his fig delivery. And you're back in your room. You stare at the ceiling and wonder what it means to be seen, borrowed, admired, but never kept. Historians still debate whether these guest loaning practices were routine or scandalous exceptions. Some believe male concubines had more freedom than we assume. Others argue they were simply more elegantly imprisoned. You remember the host's voice, low and oily. You must be very well trained, and you had smiled the way you were taught to, because at the end of the day, even borrowed vases are expected to shine. The villa feels different now. You walk its corridors with the same deliberate grace, your sandals tapping on the stone floors. Your shoulders draped in soft fabric, but the looks you get have changed. There's a whisper in the air around you, a hum of speculation. You've returned from your guest loaning not as a servant, but as a rumor. And in a house like this, rumor is currency. You've become what no one wants to admit exists powerful. Not overtly, not officially, but people now measure their words around you. The steward, once brisk and dismissive, lingers a second too long when handing you the day's instructions. One of the younger house slaves actually bows when you pass him in the atrium. You don't acknowledge it. You can't afford to. You've learned to play invisible, but now your presence crackles in the air like a storm cloud behind a curtain. It begins subtly. The lady of the house starts asking your opinion on her jewelry. You have such refined taste, she says with a tone like vinegar and honey. She never used to speak to you at all. Then your master's business partner smiles at you a bit too knowingly during a symposium, as though you share a secret. You do not, but you smile back. It's safer that way. See, once you've been loaned and admired, you become something else entirely. Not just a plaything, a potential liability, a whispered name in the ear of a visiting magistrate. A beautiful face that could in theory say the wrong thing to the wrong person and ruin everything. This is where the real danger begins, because now they have to decide what to do with you. Do they trust you? Do they test you? Or do they remove you before you remember too much? Historians still argue whether male concubines in powerful households were ever able to use their proximity to influence politics. Some believe they held sway through pillow talk and performance. Others claim they were closely watched and promptly discarded once they became inconvenient. The truth likely fell somewhere in the exhausting middle. Your master begins inviting you into more private meetings. You don't speak, of course not, but you're expected to be there, pouring wine, standing quietly, a piece of living theater. One day, after such a meeting, he turns to you and asks almost gently, "You understand the value of silence, don't you?" You do. He nods. Good. Because you're becoming noticed. He doesn't say more. He doesn't have to. A few days later, you're approached by a visiting philosopher, a stooped, clever man with oily hands and wandering eyes. "I've heard of you," he murmurs while fiddling with his scrolls. "You're the one they talk about, the golden boy." He hands you a folded scrap of parchment. A name is written on it. You don't ask questions, but you burn the parchment that night alone in your room, the embers curling like whispers. Power is a fickle friend. It comes with admirers, yes, but also shadows. You start seeing those too. You notice the kitchen slave who always leaves the door cracked, just wide enough to eavesdrop. You notice the steward's sudden forgetfulness about your meal schedule. You find a half-peeled orange on your sleeping mat odd because you don't eat oranges. Is it a message, a test, or just a mistake? The fringe detail. Some scholars suggest that slaves who gained favor in wealthy households were often subjected to subtle sabotage by other slaves or even jealous family members, particularly if they were male concubines. Gifts of food or casual accidents were sometimes used as quiet warnings or worse. Still, you rise higher. One afternoon, you are brought into the garden where your master is entertaining an Athenian statesman. You're introduced not as the boy, but as our cultured companion. You pour his drink. He looks at you and says, "Ah, yes," the one who listens. That's when you realize they know you're watching. They expect you to be watching. You've become part of the game, but the game, you understand, doesn't let you win. It lets you linger, and as long as you're useful, beautiful, careful, silent, you're safe. Mostly, you lie awake watching moonlight filter through the high window. The linen beneath you is clean, the room perfumed, your limbs freshly oiled, and your hair braided in careful curls. And still you do not sleep. Because you're starting to ask the question no one wants to answer out loud. Is this it? You've seen the arcs others have taken. The silent disappearances. The sudden shifts in favor. That boy with the dimpled chin who used to dance at symposia. He's now in the stables. The older concubine with the sharp tongue. One day she left for an errand and never returned. You know better now. You've watched your master's moods shift like a Mediterranean breeze, warm, indulgent, then cold, precise. He hasn't touched you in weeks. He hasn't dismissed you either. There's a tension in that space between. A question, what comes next? And so you begin weighing your options. Quietly, internally. Because even to think of rebellion is in some way a rebellion. Could you run? Historians still argue whether concubines like you, especially male ones, ever managed escape. Some say rare individuals slipped away in disguise, aided by sympathetic patrons or lovers. Others argue that the walls of social surveillance, geographic isolation, and utter lack of legal identity made such fantasies nearly impossible. Still, you imagine it. Walking the stone roads, dirt under your nails, clothes too big and voice untrained for shouting. You'd be a ghost out there. A beautiful stranger with no coin and too many secrets. The second option, rise. Embed yourself deeper. Become indispensable. Learn your master's habits, his enemies, his fears. Offer not just beauty, but knowledge, advice even. It's a dangerous game. One misstep and you're either out or buried. Some concubines in history rose high. They became advisors, spies, trusted companions. Their names rarely made it into marble, but their fingerprints were pressed into scrolls and behind-the-scenes whispers. The third path, devotion. Accept your place. Perfect it. Serve so seamlessly with such elegance and efficiency that you become impossible to discard. You become furniture, yes, but the kind no one dares move. But there's a fourth option too, one that you hesitate even to name. Love. You've seen it bloom before, awkward, dangerous, real. A fleeting intimacy shared in a garden. A master who looks at you like a person, not a possession. A stolen touch, a whispered promise. And then a marriage contract appears and you're forgotten. Still, the ache remains. Because you've been trained to read gestures, to interpret glances, to fill in the blank spaces of other people's desires. But you don't know what you want anymore. Not really. You've spent years being shaped, touched, praised, and silenced. But now your mind is noisy, restless, hungry. In stolen hours, you scribble words with a borrowed stylus. Not poetry plans. You diagram the layout of the house. Note the guards' habits. You start paying attention to which merchants pass through with open carts and slow-moving donkeys. You've not decided to flee, but you've decided not to drown. A quirky historical tidbit. In some Greek plays and satirical texts, male concubines are shown bribing eunuchs to smuggle out messages or coins, sometimes disguised inside bread or wine jugs. Whether these accounts were real or exaggerated, they show a keen understanding of the subversive intelligence required to survive in silence. You realize something important now. You were never just a body. You were trained to entertain, to observe, to adjust. And now that adaptability becomes your shield, maybe even your weapon. You begin answering questions with questions. You smile more strategically. When asked to sing, you choose songs with double meanings. You begin reshaping your role from passive ornament to active operator. No one else may see it, but you feel it. The shift. You are no longer just surviving. You're preparing. You're still beautiful, but now they start to say it in the past tense. The corners of your eyes hold fine lines, not painted ones. The bloom on your cheeks doesn't come as easily even with rouge. Your voice, once soft and flute-like, has settled into a lower register. And though your form is still graceful, you move slower. Less like a flame, more like a shadow. This is when the real fear sets in. You are aging in a profession where time is your fiercest rival. And ancient Greece, let's be clear, is no society that rewards a concubine's longevity. They trained you to please, to glow, to be pliable. But they didn't teach you what to do when your shine starts to fade. There's no retirement plan, no pension, no thank you feast. If you're lucky, your patron gives you a corner of the household to supervise, maybe puts you in charge of dressing younger concubines. If you're unlucky, they simply replace you quietly, efficiently, as though you were never there. You've seen it happen. A fresh face arrives. Eyes wide, body tense, voice unsure. And suddenly your master is smiling in that particular way again, not at you. And yet you remain. You've learned how to stay useful. Maybe now you keep the ledger of wine shipments. Or you translate letters from foreign guests. Perhaps you've quietly taken over the household accounts because the steward has bad math and a drinking problem. Historians still argue whether older concubines wielded hidden power behind the scenes or were simply tolerated out of habit. Some texts hint at aging courtesans becoming matchmakers or even quiet confidants to elite men. Others vanish from the record, completely absorbed into the architecture of history like dust between marble tiles. You try to imagine the future. Could you be free? You've overheard conversations about manumission. It happens occasionally. A patron writes your name into a will, grants you clothing, a small home, a single servant. But that's rare and dangerous. A freed concubine is neither a citizen nor a slave. You belong nowhere. You're a curiosity at best, a threat at worst. Still, you dream of it, a little olive grove, a sleeping mat under an open window, bread you've baked yourself. No one touching you without permission. No more oils, no more silks. Just linen and silence and the sound of your own heartbeat. But for now, you still walk the halls with practiced elegance. Your every movement a remnant of performance. The new boys look at you with curiosity, sometimes reverence. They don't know your whole story, just fragments. You were the favorite once, right? You smile, once. They ask you for advice. What wine to pour? What poems to quote? How to avoid being slapped for saying the wrong thing at the wrong moment. You don't give them everything, but you give them enough. A legacy of sorts. Sometimes in the courtyard, you pause to watch the orange trees sway in the breeze. Their fruit ripens and falls unremarked. That's you now, still sweet, still whole, but no longer plucked. A quirky historical note. In one comedic fragment by Aristophanes, an older male concubine is portrayed as a gossip-loving busybody who lives off others' food while claiming to be a household oracle. It's exaggerated, but it hints at the slipperiness of roles once beauty fades, how wit, cunning, and rumor become the new currency. You hear your name less often now. The master calls for others. The guests don't remember you. The steward forgets to list you in seating arrangements. But the cook still hands you the best figs. The guard still nods when you pass. The laundress still hums your favorite song. And late at night, a young concubine you once helped tiptoes into your room with honeyed wine and a question. Does it ever stop hurting? You reach for the cup, sip slowly, and offer the truest answer you've got. No, but you stop noticing. You're not the flame anymore. You're the ember, and some nights that's enough. The house has changed. New laughter rings in the halls, lighter, shriller, untamed. The furniture is familiar, but rearranged. The old wine merchant has been replaced. Even the dog that once curled at your feet is gone, replaced by a sleeker hound with no interest in your scent. You still live here, but it's no longer yours. You've become a fixture, like a cracked vase no one removes, because it has always been there. You slip through the rooms quieter now, less silk, more wool. Less eyeliner, more crow's feet. And though they still use your name, it often follows a pause, a searching look, as though they're trying to remember who you were. Your master, if he still deserves that title, rarely speaks to you. His interests have moved on, his body softened, his breath slower. Age has tugged at both of you, but his power aged like bronze, tarnished, still strong. Yours aged like perfume, fading, barely traceable unless someone leans in very close. And no one leans in anymore. Still, your role remains strangely vital. You smooth over servant disputes. You intercept awkward letters. You help a new concubine fake a sickness to escape an unwelcome visit from a senator. You are not loved, not even admired, but deeply relied upon. And perhaps that is a different kind of power. Sometimes, though, late at night, you let the silence stretch around you like a second skin. And you think of before, the moment you were purchased. The first time someone called you Kalos. The first gift you were too naive to understand was a collar made of gold. You still remember the songs the lyre player plucked when you danced. The sourness of wine on an empty stomach. The smell of old fig trees near the estate's back wall. You remember everything, and it aches. Historians still argue whether male concubines were victims or survivors, whether they had agency or merely adapted to roles assigned by systems too vast to fight. Some scholars say concubines were part of a deeply eroticized culture that masked brutality under ribbons and poetry. Others believe there were moments of real affection, real protection, even love. You think of all this as you sit near the courtyard in the morning sun. Your joints protest now. Your skin, once endlessly anointed, is dry and freckled. You rub olive oil into your hands not to shine, but to soothe. A young boy from the kitchen brings you bread and honey. No one told him to. He just does it. You don't ask why. And as the sky shifts toward its deeper blues, and the house fills again with the rustle of sandals, clink of bronze cups, and voices raised in debate or flirtation, you step back. You observe quiet. A ghost, not of tragedy, but of endurance. Because you are still here, you outlasted wine-soaked philosophers, jealous wives, and wandering poets. You outlived trends, fabrics, and even gods whose names are now whispered only in textbooks. And while no marble bust bears your face and no scroll records your true name, your legacy lives on in another form. In the way a younger concubine lifts his chin before entering a room. In the way he avoids the steward's mood. in the way he fingers the hem of his chiton when nervous, exactly as you once did. You are invisible, but not forgotten, so now the house grows quieter again. The fire in the brazier dims its glow, no longer flickering across painted walls. The lyre rests untouched in the corner. Somewhere a sleeping dove stirs in the rafters, feathers rustling like old silk. The air is thick with stillness, like the moment just before sleep claims you fully. You lean back, feeling the years settle gently over you, like a worn linen cloak. There's no more rushing, no more performances, no more being chosen or displayed or kept awake until the stars faded. Just breath, just warmth, just the whisper of wind through a cracked shutter. And as your eyes soften, lids growing heavy, you wonder not about the pain or the power, but about the quiet. The rare stolen moments of peace, the brief friendships, the kindnesses that asked for nothing, the sounds of laughter that didn't come from whine or command. The past doesn't speak loudly anymore. It hums softly, distantly, like waves far off on a hidden shore. You were part of a world that dressed up pleasure and called it culture. A world that mixed cruelty with honey and expected you to smile. And you did. And somehow you made it through. And now it's okay to rest. No one's watching. No one's asking. There are no roles left to play, only sleep. So let your breath slow. Let your body soften. Let your thoughts drift like incense curling up toward the open sky. You've carried enough. You've survived more than most. And tonight you are safe unseen and finally still. End of script. Sweet dreams.